I just assumed that we were recording.
No!
We just talked for like an hour and 15 minutes.
I know!
No!
Oh my god.
I wish I lived in the 10th floor.
Well, welcome back to the channel. If you didn't know, we just did a whole recording without recording it.
Oh my god. I can't believe this happened. Okay, at least it was practice.
All right, at least we know what we have to condense down.
Get the condensed version that we want.
We just spent an hour and 15 minutes talking about Spider-Man No Way Home, not realizing it wasn't recording at all.
Wow. Back 20 years old.
Are you listening?
No. Really?
Oh, God. Hello.
Oh, I have a booger. Oh. Whatever.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. So what you saw from the intro, that, as a matter of fact, did happen. We haven't put it together yet, but we're definitely using it as the intro. Matt and I basically filmed an hour and 15 minutes yesterday, thinking that we did film, where in actuality, nothing was recorded. So we ended up just talking for an hour and 15 minutes.
It was definitely more than that. It was like 2 hours.
It was 2 hours longer than it should have gone. And oh,
never said so much with just one facial expression. It's like as soon as we were done, your face was like, and I just like a whole world of emotion just opened up for me. I knew exactly what had happened.
Yeah. To basically set the scene is we were wrapping up. We were about to finish. And I said, I'm going to upload the audio right now. Pause mid-sentence. Eyes bug-eyed. And I just saw that in the bottom portion of the screen, I did not hit record.
And I never committed to recording, so it's on both of us.
Yeah, so basically, if this does not record, we're quitting. It's not going to be meant to happen, but hopefully we are able to get something out there. So we'll see. But
this on YouTube right now, it's a success. So
yes. It was a little bit of a blessing in disguise in the fact that we realized that we were probably going over like an hour over than what we should have gone or what we wanted to do. We really do not want to make these like over a half hour. We want to make them a lot more condensed and a lot shorter. So we think we're able to kind of narrow it down a little bit and kind of revise the content a little bit more. So there should be a lot more laid out. We'll still go off on some tangents, obviously, but it's just going to be a lot more, I guess, focused of information of what we're going to go off of.
Efficient.
So, sorry, what?
You said efficient.
Yeah, hopefully we will be a little bit more efficient. So with that, let's get right into the intro. Whoops, there goes the microphone. So everyone, welcome back to the channel, the weekly snap, where we're going to be giving reactions, breakdowns, reviews, and then also some theories and predictions on all things Marvel. Today we're going to be discussing the movie that basically gave us the inspiration in order to do this channel in the first place, Spider-Man No Way Home. We're going to be doing a spoiler review, discussing all things that we liked, giving some examples for each of those things that we really loved, and then also doing some critique at the end and really talking about some gray areas that we think may be considered some plot holes. So be sure to stick around. It's going to be a lot of fun. So with that, let's just dive right into our favorites in order to be more actually efficient with our time. So we're actually doing what we said we're going to do. So let's discuss some of our favorites. And a lot of my favorites kind of lead right into the audience that we were with, basically the setting, kind of like all the cheers definitely help facilitate like which parts I thought were my favorite. So in order to like justify what we really liked, Matt, like you take it over, like talk about the setting, basically what was going on, where we were watching this movie and everything.
I remember like it was yesterday. It was the night of December 17th, the Friday, the day after the movie came out. And I know you might be asking yourself at home, why didn't you see it on opening night? You guys are real Marvel fans. Shut the fuck up. The reason is because there's 12 of us that wanted to go. And Ryan kindly volunteered his time and stayed up all night trying to secure the tickets on Fandango. Unfortunately, that would have been impossible on the opening night. So we got to see it the subsequent night. So after staying up all night and enduring several site crashes on Fandango's website, he managed to score the tickets. But it seemed to have somewhat been for null because one by one, our party dropped like flies. We had our buddy's girlfriend was supposed to fly in because she was visiting her friend, but her friend got sick, so she couldn't come. One of our buddies from school got sick, so he couldn't come. One of my buddies and his sister, them two didn't end up coming. Another friend from high school didn't end up coming. And this all happened sequentially. It wasn't like all at once. So we got whittled down to 4. It was me, Ryan's buddy from his hometown, and his sister. And then they eventually had another couple come with us, so it ended up being 6. And 6 is still a crowd. It's a party, and we made it work. But yeah, and I think we still had enough energy between the 6 of us to account for the amount of people that we lost. So in a way, as you know, we talked about this before. It was kind of like we got blipped. Half our group did, at least.
We truly did get snapped away, and we even got like more than snapped, as Matt said. We only ended up having 4 at one point, but with it, like the time of the release for Spider-Man was basically the weekend after SantaCon, which is basically when shit hit the fan with Omicron kind of going wild in New York. But Matt and I still said, fuck it, we're still going because we're not sure if it's going to be delayed at all in theaters, and this has to be seen in theaters. I'm very glad that we did risk it all for this movie. We definitely probably would have done it again, honestly, because this was definitely something we had to see in theaters, and just makes it more magical whenever you have other like hardcore fans going with you. So we saw this movie at the only time we could really get technically on premiere night. I guess it always is released like a day earlier than it's said. So we're going like on that Friday, and we go at 11 o'clock at night. That's the only time I could get like reasonable tickets, and we're still in the 4th row, kind of tucked to the side. But even then, like whenever Fandango crashes and whenever you're in New York watching Spider-Man, you know it's just going to be a free-for-all. It's going to be an all-out frenzy. And that's basically what it was, because you're not having like little kids show up at 11 o'clock at night. And you also have people that are basically giving up half their weekend evening plans, so on a Friday, to go see this movie. And that's what we did. And that's whenever we found like this is an amazing crowd that we're going to see it with. And basically like all the TikToks that you probably see of like the live audience reactions, like the really good ones, that is honestly what it felt like whenever we were in the theater. That's what made it all the more amazing. And just like Marvel has a way of just bringing strangers together in order to celebrate like a 2-hour film, or like, I guess a 3-hour film in this case. And basically, you know, one of the stories I like to give is that for this crowd that basically came with us, it was me, Matt, and as Matt said, it was one of my really good friends from my hometown who I had not seen or talked to in 4 years, but I was like not afraid to hit him up to ask him to come to this movie. And I felt like we just like did not even skip a beat, just because like we're just so excited to see this movie. And he brought his sister as well. And his sister is a year above me in high school. But to be honest, I probably said more to her that evening about Marvel alone than I did the entirety of high school for that 3 years, because she was a year above me. And it's just amazing how that works. So like whenever, you know, I go up to New York again, probably for Doctor Strange coming out, I'm going to be inviting Chris and Embarrass again to come see it, because it's just, hopefully, you know, there's no virus or anything to really be lurking around out there to cut our group in half again. So it's going to be an awesome, amazing time. But like, we had to describe the setting because it was one of a kind experience. It really was.
It was electric.
Yeah. And so like with that, as I alluded to like before, like a lot of my favorite scenes definitely came because of just the wild reactions that fans were having. And so one of my favorite scenes was obviously whenever Tobey Maguire like came into through the portal that Ned just opened. And so it was really funny, like because we were kind of like up front, whenever Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker came through, I didn't really know it was him. I thought it was like Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And then obviously you reveal the mask. Everyone's going berserk. I stand up. I start clapping. I give the proper, you know, the amount of attention it should be given. It was awesome in that way. And then whenever he started doing the portal again, that's when I grabbed Matt's hand. Matt was sitting on the right of me. Chris was on the left. I'm grabbing both of their hands. My feet are like up in the air at this point, going full dead bug position. We're shaking the seats. Everyone's just going crazy around us.
Great, it's just some random guy.
I basically blacked out in that moment. I don't know if I can fully fathom like what happened, just because it was so wild in that scene. And then it was my favorite, but then it also was like, it was my least favorite. And I was just telling Matt this yesterday. Is that during that scene, what happened is like, I was like, because my feet were in the air like a little while, I put them back down and I was just like, so like clenched. that my left hamstring started to cramp. It started to twitch, and then it turned into a full out cramp, which is the absolute worst cramp to have whenever you can't, like, whenever you're physically, like, you really should not be moving, in the sense, like, I was not going to get up and leave the theater to endure this cramp. I was going to sit there and take it like a champ. Fortunately, it subsided in like 15 seconds, but it was so close to like being the worst like hour of my life in order to have that cramp come and go in my left hammy. So dodged the bullet there. It was very close to being the worst possible turn of events out of all things to happen. You know, the movie theater getting shutting down or whatever it may be, to like me enduring a cramp for the last like best hour of the movie. So very much like dodged the bullet there. But that was my favorite part. Like, Matt, what was your favorite from the movie?
Oh man, I think I'd speak on behalf of everybody when I say there are countless memorable moments from the entire film. But I'm gonna go with probably one of the most popular choices, which is when they all landed on the head of the Statue of Liberty together and with the moonlight in the background. And I was like, I was 1,000 milligrams deep on Tylenol because my crotch was really hurting me before the movie, and I had no clue why. So it's just like, there's no way I'm gonna let my balls be aching when Tobey Maguire is on screen. At least not for that reason. It's only gonna be because of Tobey Maguire. And
if your balls are going to be hurting, it's because it's going to be self-inflicted.
Exactly.
You're going to be rubbing them. That's the only reason why.
I mean, they were suffocating in that onesie, but that was the price was well worth it. If I end up infertile, it will have been for a good cause. But to me, that was by far the most hype scene. But it's hard to pick one just because it felt like every 10 seconds people were on their feet, as you had mentioned before. And it's almost like it's such. What made it such a beautiful experience is that, like, with the advent of social media and especially like apps like TikTok, like, you can see in theaters all across the world that people are having identical reactions to these scenes in theaters. And I feel like that's what makes it so much more connecting, is that everybody's able to, like, it's almost like attending like a really raucous like sports event.
Oh God.
I wouldn't even call it a movie. It's as Martin Scorsese says, it's like a theme ride, but I mean it in the good way.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially me too. Like, as I was telling Matt, like, before we started recording, is like, right now they have the Waste Management Phoenix Open going on in Scottsdale. It's like the most rowdy golf event there is, because on the 16th hole on the par 3 there, they basically have, you're basically like in a coliseum where they build stands around the hole. And so it just, like, the decibel, levels, like, able to get up like as high as you want. You don't have to be quiet at all. So yesterday they had a hole-in-one, and they also had a hole-in-one today as well. And so I think it was Sam Ryder and Carlos Ortiz that had one. And so they had, like, they just filmed like the stands, like the reactions. It was like people throwing beers like onto the golf course. Like, it's the one bucket list place like I want to attend, like, as a fan, just because of how rowdy you're allowed to get. And whether there's a hole-in-one, like, you have to basically like hold off the other groups behind you in order to allow the greens to clear, just because people are going berserk, throwing beer cans everywhere. And that reaction just reminded me of basically the day after seeing the TikToks that came out of whenever Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man came on, like, the theater's going crazy. It's something that's like just parallels it, and they're very different, and it's very unique how they're both able to cause just so just get everyone up on their feet, as you said.
You think that you could call that the Happy Gilmore effect? Would you say that Happy Gilmore ruined the sanctity of golf?
No, I think it's a good thing. I honestly really love it. And there's some people that fully embrace it. Like, there are a few guys that are basically what's the phrase to use? Like, the man of the people, I think is the proper term. So I was just telling them, like, you have a few people like as Harry Higgs and Joel Damon that basically lifted up their shirt like after they made a putt and just like waving around their shirt like on the putt, like on the putting green there, just to get the all the fans like hyped up, like after they'd made like a birdie putt or something, it's really cool. And so every once in a while, I think, like, if it was all the time, maybe it'd be a little bit different. But you have that one tournament a year where everyone's able to let loose, and especially like for movies like these where people can like let loose in the theaters, I think it's amazing to see. I love to be a part of that. I think my brother in particular, he doesn't really like it, which is, why I don't see movies with him. But like for people like you and me, we're just like shaking the seats and everything. And it's really fun to be a part of. And it's just a great way to have like, hundreds of strangers just bond with you instantaneously over like one film. Like, whenever Matt and I went into the theater, we had this like one guy who looked exactly like Miles Morales, like give us the hardest stabs of our life and then like rush into the bathroom to go pee or something. It's really odd, but like also it's so cool to have someone just like basically share that immediate bond with you just because you're both wearing onesies going into Spider-Man film, you know?
Yeah, no, yeah, it's like an unspoken camaraderie. It's like you don't need to exchange any words. It's like once you recognize that person is like shares Marvel fandom, you're like, you can come eat Thanksgiving at my house.
Yeah, you're basically like one of us. Like,
Exactly.
basically part of the cult at that point. So it's really, really fun. It's like, since like we're already like talking about the characters and basically, you know, whether they're lining up, whatever it may be. I think, you know, Marvel did an awesome job of bringing like just the right amount of characters, and they gave everyone like their appropriate screen time in my mind. There's also some deeper meanings to each of the characters within like the plot themselves. I think they all played a very important role given their new age. So they're able to like adapt the characters from like their original trilogy or sequel into this new Spider-Man movie, which I found to be very cool. So they definitely added a really unique creative element that, Matt, you pointed out like right after the movie that I didn't even think about, which is kind of like to see like how their evolved personalities play a role in like a new family dynamic almost like amongst the Spider-Man, which is really cool to think about. So Matt, like talk about that exactly, what was going on with the three different Spider-Man and like the family dynamic and all.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think it's probably pretty obvious to the viewers, but they had this distinct brotherly dynamic that you see in families that have three children, where you have the youngest, the middle child, and the oldest. Obviously, the youngest is usually the baby, or not usually is always the baby. So they typically get the most attention, or the focal point of everyone's lives. And, you know, this was Tom Holland's movie. So of course he was going to be the focal point. And he was, you know, somewhat immature and still finding his way in this world. And luckily he had his older brothers to guide him, especially Toby, who is, you could imagine, is the oldest brother in this scenario. And he is sort of sharing the fruits of his experience and wisdom with Tom, so that he can, you know, help him avert a dark path and reach his full potential as Spider-Man. And then, of course, you have Andrew as the middle child, who to me, I think fits most perfectly with that persona, because he's quirky, but he feels like, you know, he doesn't get enough love. He's kind of neglected, and like he needs some affirmation that he's a good dude. And clearly that's given to him when Toby says, "You're amazing." And that was an awesome callback to the Amazing Spider-Man series. And so I just love that whole dynamic. And I think they did a really great job of demonstrating their different levels of experience in subtle ways. One example that comes to mind, which may have been overlooked by a lot of viewers because it was such an intense moment, was when Tobey Maguire first appeared on screen. When he came through the portal, he was wearing a regular outfit. And I think what that demonstrates that, you know, he's clearly the most experienced Spider-Man, and he knows the importance of concealing your identity. And so he was in a foreign place because he didn't know he had been transported to a different dimension. So I think he was just trying to be cautious. Whereas Andrew, a little bit goofier, a little less experienced, was just like perusing around in his Spider-Man costume without a mask on, like, so I really appreciated that contrast there.
Yeah, no, you bring up a great point. I didn't even like totally think about that, because they mentioned it in the movie, but you don't really think a lot about it and see how it kind of leads into the family dynamic of Toby being the most mature, and he was definitely there for Tom Holland like a lot along the ways, where some of the advice that he was giving was a lot more from like positive experiences that he had like over the past 20 years since like the first movie came out. And then Andrews is a lot more of you should be doing this based on the failed experiences like that I've had. So based on the failures, this is what I've learned. This is what you should be learning. Whereas Toby is like a lot more positive type reinforcement, basically. And, you know, it's really interesting to bring up like Tom being the youngest. And I think kind of leading back to like all the characters that are part of it, I think they did a great job of keeping like just making the proper amount of cameos. So like Matt and I were talking yesterday of, you know, whether we think like Gwen Stacy and then Kirsten Dunst's MJ should have been in the movie. And we both kind of agreed that it would have been better to keep him out because it would have taken away from like the main focal point of Tom's crisis going on. So not only is like the audience focusing on Tom because it's his movie, but also everyone within the actual, you know, MCU is focusing on him because Peter Parker's identity is just revealed as being Spider-Man. So it's kind of like a two different like avenue way of how the actual focus is on Peter Parker, Tom Holland, Spider-Man within this actual scenario. So it's, a lot of the attention is going to him, and you have like the older brothers to look up to in order to give him that. And I just thought that family dynamic was just a really important part, like really creative element to the plot. And I love how Marvel is able to like keep that consistently, adapt the characters to actually, time is going on like in their lives. They're not trying to make them like the same age or anything. So I think they're really creative about how they go about it, and they create some awesome themes too to kind of align with their new personas. And I think that their new personas right now are going to open up a lot of different avenues, hopefully, for these other Spider-Man, for these other villains within the MCU. And I think that'll be for a later video to talk about in the future there. So that's a little bit about the plot. And I think something that's also like really important for the plot, making something a good movie, especially for Marvel, is if you have people that don't really know anything about it, or either watching it for the first time, if they're able to follow along, and then if they're able to like the movie just in general. And there's actually someone in our group who I believe she actually didn't even know Tom Holland was in the movie. And after, I'm like, how'd you feel with all that,
person in America that didn't know that Tom Holland was in
I'm kind of like hoping that this is not the case, but my buddy, Chris, was telling me that she didn't know Tom Holland was in the movie. And I'm like, after, like, what do you think about like basically that experience? Because like I'm jumping up and down and everything. Matt's doing the same. And she's like, that was like really fun. And I'm like, well, what do you think about the movie? I'm like, and she's like, oh yeah, that was actually really good too. So it kind of like worked out in both scenarios. And whenever you have someone that doesn't really know a whole lot about Marvel is able to follow along, like I think she's hooked, and I think she's able to hopefully be brought along into the cult very soon.
We've won another convert. It'd be really funny is if like when he first comes up on screen, she goes, "That's the guy from Uncharted."
That's Billy Elliot right up there.
I forgot he's Billy Elliot. That's crazy. Good for him.
Well, hopefully she won't be surprised next time he comes on screen. Hopefully she knows.
Maybe she has that condition where you forget people's faces really easily.
Oh, I forget people's names. I don't know, but I'm really good with faces, terrible with names. Short-term memory loss.
I think Lisa has it actually. It's called prosopagnosia.
I think it's best if we don't try to pronounce it, and we just know that there's a condition out there where you forget someone's face. Maybe she does have that. Who knows? But like, I guess, so whenever you have someone that's able to enjoy like the plot, I think, for us, especially for big Marvel guys, we're really in it for the fan reaction and see how they're able to like adapt these characters into the movies. And obviously whenever like a cameo is brought on, we know the actors are going to be really good. And so if it like doesn't get great reviews, then usually sometimes it can be the writing's fault. But in this time, the writing was absolutely like just amazing, out of this world. And it's very key like for movie review. So I think it's really important to go into it, and it kind of like has its own branches under like the writing section. And, there's definitely some compliments that have to go along with the writing in order to ensure that it's going to be good. And so I think a crucial part of the writing is going to be is the dialogue is in any movie. And then for Marvel, as I just said, it's like, how are you going to handle these cameos? What dialogue are you going to make? Or is it going to be a little bit cheesy whenever you bring back callbacks of anything? Because those are very crucial, and they certainly had a fair share. I absolutely loved them all. But like, Matt, how do you feel about all the callbacks? Because some of them we loved, some of them we didn't really get initially. And so we kind of had to do our own kind of analysis again. But what were your favorites?
Yeah. Well, before I get into that, I think you're alluding to like a really important issue that's arisen since the release of Endgame, which is how do they deliver on the fans' needs without overindulging them in fan service.
Yeah.
And, I think right after seeing Endgame, no one ever anticipated that there could be anything that would ever come close to that again, or it would take several years to build up to, because, Endgame is the culmination of, 22 movies and, the plot lines of countless characters. And it was done, at least in my opinion, in like a meaningful and cohesive way. And I feel like they accomplished almost the exact same thing with Spider-Man. And that's why I felt like it was necessary for Aunt May to die in order to make the incorporation of Toby and Andrew understandable and believable, because they're really the only two beings in the entire multiverse that could empathize with Peter's like struggle and hardship. So
Yeah.
and like they were able to provide him the support and guidance that he needed in order to like overcome the wave of anger and darkness that would have swallowed him had he not had them. And yeah, so with that in mind, with like, because they were in there, they had the opportunity to do a lot of callbacks, and they obviously had to be selective in what they chose because again, they didn't want to like, oversaturate the movie with callbacks. Otherwise, it would it would kind of dilute the plot. But for me, I really enjoyed when Ned approached Toby in the lab and was like, "Do you have a best friend?" He's like, "Yeah, like my best friend like tried to kill me, so like I had to like put an end to him."
Do you have a best friend too?
I did.
You did?
He died in my arms after he tried to kill me. It's heartbreaking.
Dude.
And like you could just see how disturbed Ned was on his face. And then a couple of scenes later, he approached Tom and he's like, I'd never try to hurt you, right?
And I promise you, I won't turn into a supervillain and try to kill you.
Okay. Thank you.
Like I think that was such a seamless way of incorporating that plot point from the third Tobey Maguire movie. So, I have too many favorites, but that one is one of the first that comes to mind. What about you?
That was definitely a very humorous spin on like the way of bringing up basically a really critical, like sad part in their past, because it was very emotional whenever you had the different characters pass away, even after them turning like two villains, let's say. Oh my gosh, it's pretty funny whenever they actually put it out on Spider-Man 3 here. So it was very, very exciting. And like I think for me, mine was obviously there's a lot of ones that I very much laughed at. So whenever you had Norman Osborn saying like I'm something of a scientist myself, and you had a few other ones out there as well that a lot of people really loved. Mine was probably a little bit more on the emotional side of things, and I love whenever a movie's able to choke me up like that by thinking back, all the way to 2002, 2003. So you may be able to guess where this is going. And so I'm thinking of a scene that's very emotional, so strong. And so to set the scene, it's going to be between Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, Peter Parker, but I'll just refer to Peter Parker for the rest of this example, and then also Dr. Otto Octavius. So their meeting was just really impactful for me, and I think it's really crucial to set the scene. So on the one side, you have Tobey Maguire. So his Peter Parker, he's gone 20 years goes by without seeing his old mentor for a brief period, and soon turned enemy. But then he sees Otto basically sacrificing himself in order to save the city, to save him and MJ. Now, on the other side, you have Otto, who basically hasn't seen Peter in what feels like a few days, but now he is faced with a much older, much wiser Peter Parker who's aged by 20 years. This is 20 years since basically Spider-Man 2. So he is all grown up now. And so to see like the last 20 years have been, basically he gives the reaction like, Peter, like, it's so good to see you. How have you been? And then that's whenever Toby, like Peter Parker, like recognizing that Otto is in a good state right now. He thinks back to a time when all was normal, and he thinks back to one of their first interactions, and basically he just says, trying to do better.
Tells me you're brilliant. He also tells me you're lazy.
Trying to do better.
Being brilliant's not enough, young man.
And that's just shows that this was a callback to the original Spider-Man movie. I said like one of the first interactions that he had after being basically given like a backhanded compliment by Otto. He says, always trying to do better. And so whenever he gives that same line again in this movie, it shows that like, despite him aging by 20 years, he's still the same brilliant man that he was, that is always looking to go out of his way to like, so basically sacrifice himself in order to save the city, in order to put himself in danger, in order to help others. So he's still the same old guy, despite, maturing by 20 years. So it's just like a really emotional, impactful scene to me that I thought was really cool to see again. And that's one of the instances where I feel like the dialogue has to be great in order to see, what interaction are they going to have. But in that case, you need the acting in order to complement that great dialogue. And so between the basically that year's difference of not seeing each other and then seeing someone who's aged by 20 years, that acting felt so real. It's definitely felt like a very real scenario, and it was really impactful, really cool to see in the end. So it just got me, like, the second time we saw that movie, it just got me very excited and just it warmed my heart. It basically melts in my heart. So it was really cool.
Yeah, and it was scenes like that made it, like, frankly impressive how these actors who hadn't played these roles in God knows how long were able to just, like, put their costumes on and suddenly, like, get into those personas almost instantaneously. Like, it didn't feel like they lost a step whatsoever, which is it's really cool.
Yeah, none of them, yeah, as you said, I'm just lost for words, because kind of like I was watching the scene the other day thinking we might put this in the video, and just watching, like, it was like some old TikTok of going from basically the 2003, Spider-Man 2 to this one, doing those two different callbacks. And it was just like, and they had some sad music to it. I'm like, oh man, like, oh, this is so tough. This is it does make a grown man want to cry. So there certainly were, like, a lot of great additions into it, but there's also, like, some things I feel like it's important to talk about now as to some things that may not have lived up to our expectation, or some things that we may have hoped to see. So, like, between us two, were there anything that you may have thought was like a little plot hole, or like any gray areas within the movie?
I guess no review is complete without criticisms. I had very few, but the depiction of Electro and how he somehow was brought in by Strange's spell didn't make much sense to me, but I figured, you have a better understanding of the fan theories that have been used to explain that. So you should probably talk about that.
Yeah. So, like for, like, Electro, like, the one thing about it is, like, after, I was doing some reading, I don't know how to read quite yet, but I'm still learning. So I was able to put some things together, watch a lot of videos.
That's how we have Siri.
That's right. That text to speech is great.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so for the thing like Electro, one of the biggest plot holes, like, a lot of people are bringing out, that I think is one of the few ones I somewhat agree with, is that, one, he looks different. So from Spider-Man 2, it's that for the Amazing Spider-Man 2, he's blue, and this one he's yellow. And so one of the other things, in addition to the appearance being different, is that there's really no kind of acknowledgement of how, in fact, he was able to learn the identity of Peter Parker, because the basis for Doctor Strange's spell being broken is that all those that knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man were now coming to this universe. And so it was never really acknowledged as to how he was able to know of his identity. And so I think with that, there's, like, a few, obviously, since the movie was released, one of the few benefits of being able to do, like, this channel, like, a lot later on from its release date, is that you're able to kind of see some of the reviews out there and kind of pick and choose your favorite and kind of piece together those that really make sense. And so there's definitely a few that I'd like to talk about, some possible explanations. I'll first talk about the appearance, because that seems a lot more interesting, in that for him kind of going from blue to yellow, I think Jamie Foxx's one of his ways of basically saying, I will only do this movie if this changes, is basically the fact that he is not going to be blue anymore. And so he was able to look a lot more like the comic book version of Electro. I don't know exactly what it is off the top of my head, but it definitely seemed a lot more accurate. He seemed a lot more normal as well. And then it kind of makes sense with the whole MCU perspective, in the fact that whenever he was being given an interview, Jamie Foxx was like, how do you make this guy a little bit more impactful, make it a little more grounded? And he said that whenever he acquired some abilities, which they did say within the movie himself, Jamie Foxx's character goes and says, like, something feels different. Electricity feels different. And something feels a little bit off as to how he's able to basically gain a little bit more power. And because he's on a different universe with some, like, kind of a variation of his abilities, it made sense that he's able to project himself differently. And now this part makes sense, because back in Amazing Spider-Man 2, he's very self-conscious about his identity, about his appearance, no one really noticing him. And so now by changing appearance, a lot more people do, and it definitely positively impacts him a lot more, which is one of the reasons why he didn't really want to go back to being his old normal self, which is why he basically ripped the, like, arc reactor type thing off him from the beginning that was dampening his powers. And so it kind of caused him to kind of go off on this big Rampage with the other villains there. So that it kind of does make sense. And there is also a little bit of a tangent to the What If series. It kind of made sense for me. And that whenever Gamora was trying to use the Infinity Stone Crusher against Ultron in order to crush the Infinity Stones, it was not able to work on that universe because it was designed for the universe that she was on, where she was able to use for those Infinity Stones.
Of course. The Crusher was designed to destroy the stones on my world, not his.
So it kind of makes sense that because now Electro's in a different universe, he is able to kind of have different abilities and he's able to project himself a little bit differently. That's kind of how I'm able to somewhat bring in things from like the other universe into here, some of that knowledge. So that was kind of cool. And then the other thing for his, not his appearance, but for his like kind of knowledge of Peter Parker is one of the big things is that whenever he absorbing like the data like from the power grid before basically he passed away and died, is that I believe it was in that instance where he's like absorbing data. There may have been there's some speculation that he's able to learn of his identity through that, or there's also another case where he's like basically serving as like there's like another universe. It's not the Spider-Man 2 universe, Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's a different universe out there, which is why he's able to look a little bit different. And so in that universe, he's able to also learn of his identity through somewhere else. But that one doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because he did say that he thought Spider-Man was black. So that one's not really all set in stone, but the appearance one to me makes a little bit of sense. Does that make sense to you how I explained it?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. That was a great explanation. And if I had to distill it down to a couple words, I'd probably just say is Jamie Foxx is way too hot to not show his beauty on screen.
Yeah.
Like he was like this in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Like that man is like, he is like the Shakespeare of our time. He can sing, he can dance, he can act. He's too great of a multi-talent to not be fully celebrated on the silver screen. So
it really is like basically
his beauty justice.
Yeah, him and Tom Cruise are the people that can do it all. Tom Cruise is probably someone we're going to be talking about very soon for the Doctor Strange movie, but we'll wait for another time for that. But that's a lot of things I wanted to cover right now. Again, it's just a spoiler review, some of our favorite parts, some of the things we may have thought was a great area. But before we end up and wrap up, Matt, is there anything you'd like to add from like some of your other favorite moments you'd like to discuss?
No, I think the one last thing I wanted to add was, kind of zooming out here, looking at the bigger picture for the future of Tom Holland's Spider-Man is I think they've kind of gotten him ready for the next phase in his development. In Homecoming, we had him over-reliant on both his suit and Iron Man in order to be a hero. And then obviously Iron Man dies in Endgame. Spoiler alert! If you didn't see that,
What?
unsubscribe from the channel. But in Far From Home, we see that Peter Parker is trying to live in a world without the help of Iron Man, and almost feels like he's without some sort of father figure or mentor. And then in the third movie, he suffers his first real tragedy, which is obviously the loss of Aunt May, and he's trying to figure out how to cope with it. And so it's not until the end of the movie that he becomes completely self-reliant when the entire world, including those very close to him, forget about his true identity. And I think the best way they represented that was when he stitched together a new suit using Aunt May's, I'm blanking on the word for that technology. It is a very antiquated. Yep, exactly. Sewing kit. So he's just using, it's just obviously a stark contrast, no pun intended, between the technology that's available to him and the technology he used to have, which was Stark Tech. So I think that was just a great way to take us out of the movie and get us ready for the next trilogy, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it's a great way of like transitioning into the next video of like what's going to come, because that consistency that they create is really what we're looking for to see how they span across from movie 1 to movie 3, where in a regular movie you want to see how like the character development and like how the plot's going to thicken within one movie alone, but to see like John Watts, God himself, Kevin Feige, basically have that character development from Spider-Man 1 all the way from Homecoming all the way to No Way Home, of making himself a lot more independent. It's definitely is awesome to see it, and it sets up a lot of interesting possibilities for his future whenever he goes on from high school to beyond. So it's great just to see that development, and you bring up a very, very valid point. So that consistency that they create, everything coming full circle throughout the entire trilogy, is definitely one of the things that definitely hardcore fans would love to see. And I think it's a really important point to bring up. And it's some of those details that I think will make it a good transition for the next video. That is going to be what we are going to be looking at ourselves. It's definitely, we definitely wanted to split this up to make it a lot more condensed. So for next time, we're going to be discussing any of the details that you may have missed that are either very big picture, like what Matt discussed, or they're going to be very specific. And the video is going to be a good transition into one of the other ones that we're probably looking at doing on Spider-Man, because I feel like we can never run out of stuff to talk about from this movie alone. We're going to talk about even more stuff that we may not have covered. And that's going to be some of the topics that Matt and I love discussing the most, which are going to be theories and predictions. So we're going to see how certain characters' origins and their backstories are going to turn around to see how they play into larger big picture stuff within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So we have a few videos that are going to be very important. They're going to be very fun for us to film, and we really hope you guys are going to enjoy it as well. And so I think that's going to wrap up this video. So thank you guys very much. If you were sticking around, feel free to follow us on social media.
Ring those bells
for some more condensed frequent content. And then, as Matt said, ring those bells and also subscribe to our channel so you know whenever a new video is going to be released. And if you're ever curious as to when new videos are going to come out, well, just remember the name. Feel free to look back at that. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed. And this has been the Weekly Snap. Fuck, that was still terrible.
One day.
There we go.
Add an audio bite for a snap, and it'll look real.